Patricia Gibson. I call upon her to move the motion.
I move the motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and please do make your speech. Thank you very much.
Chair, I have been seeking to secure a debate on the issue of pensions in the nuclear decommissioning industry for some months now, since I am deeply disturbed by the way these workers have been treated and the way they have been betrayed by the UK Government. I speak on behalf of those in my own constituency in North Ayrshire and Arran who work on the Hunterston A site, but we know this is a matter of material interest to all those workers across the United Kingdom who share the sense of betrayal and treachery at how their pensions are being treated as if they are of no account. The betrayal these workers feel should be no surprise to anyone who has followed events since a nuclear estate was privatised in the 1980s by the Thatcher government. Guarantees were made requiring the new private sector employers to continue to provide pension benefits for those employed at the time of privatisation, at least as good as those they were receiving in the public sector. These guarantees, these legal protections, have now been abandoned. This has been made starkly clear by the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority and employers who have consulted on reforms to two final salary schemes, seeking the views of members on reforms including moving to a career-averaged revalued earnings arrangement and a cap on pensionable pay. The UK Government decided that because the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority is classified as public sector, these schemes should be reformed under the Public Service Pension Act 2013. However, clearly, the pensions are not public sector, as I shall go on to make clear. The erosion of decommissioning workers' pensions is unacceptable. Radical reform of these pensions has already taken place in the mid-2000s, being closed to new entrants who now have inferior defined contribution pensions. Public sector reform takes no account of the fact that decommissioning sites are now in the private sector, nor that, unlike other public sector workers, redundancy is an inherent part of their employment.
Would the Honourable Lady give way?
I will indeed.
Thank you very much. And I congratulate the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran on securing this debate. And pension rights in the event of redundancy are particularly important for workers undertaking decommissioning at Trasfynydd Power Station in my constituency because of the timescale for closure and the age profile of the workforce. I'm sure, well, I hope the member will agree with me and that she will seek from the Minister a commitment that a solution will be found for employees of Magnox Limited and other companies affected by the Enterprise Act in her response later this afternoon.
I very much concur with my honourable friend. What we are seeking here today is a response from the Minister that will show fairness and an understanding of what these workers have already gone through and the assurances that were made, and all further action in the future should take full account of that. So I would very much agree with my honourable lady. As I was saying, redundancy is an inherent part of the employment of these workers, since clearing nuclear sites is time limited. This means that the prospect of redundancy is written into their job in a way that doesn't apply to any other job. The job of a worker in a nuclear decommissioning site is highly technical, skilled, and sometimes even dangerous. The prospect of redundancy being inbuilt into your job is bad enough, but to have your pension eroded at what is increasingly looking like regular intervals is simply unacceptable. This creates disincentives for such workers to enter the industry or to stay in the industry, and is extremely bad for morale. The uncertainty created by this erosion of their pensions does not just affect the workers, of course. It affects their families, it affects their financial planning for their retirement plans, and it shows with crystal clarity that any legal protections offered by governments to workers mean nothing when they can be ripped up and disregarded when convenient. I raised this very matter at Treasury Questions 2 months ago and was told by the Right Honourable Member for South West Hertfordshire that, and I quote, "It is necessary to have terms and conditions which reflect the modern situation and what is the case that applies across the economy as a whole." I wonder if the Minister today can tell me how that response squares with the cast iron guarantees made to these workers when the nuclear estate was privatised. Were these workers told at that time that these so-called cast iron guarantees were in fact actually written on water?
Will the Honourable Lady give way?
I will indeed.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Is this not just a constant theme that we have all the time, that people take out pensions, whether state or private, in good faith, trying to plan for something that will happen 20, 30, 40 years later, and by the time they get there, the goalposts have moved?
Absolutely, and that's something I will go on to discuss later in my speech, Mr Chair. There is indeed a chilling, a wider, a broader pattern, a broader narrative that is becoming increasingly apparent as each day passes. And although workers are classed as public sector workers, their terms and conditions are not devolved to the Scottish Parliament as other public sector workers are. Indeed, Scottish nuclear workers still have their severance and early retirement terms dictated by the UK Government. What is clear is that the goalposts alter when it is deemed financially beneficial for the Government or the industry, while the pension interests of the workers are a secondary consideration. The ONS, the Office for National Statistics, classified Magnox as a public sector organisation, which means their pensions are in scope for reform by the UK Government, despite the fact that these workers work on sites that are privatised. However, the United Kingdom Government has proposed to reform IR35 tax arrangements for contractors working within the public sector or working for public authorities. Draft guidance from the Government uses the definition of public authorities contained in the Freedom of Information Acts. This definition includes bodies specifically listed in the schedules attached to the Acts, publicly owned companies, and any other body designated as a public authority by the Secretary of State. Interestingly, Magnox is not listed in the schedules, and it's not listed because it's a privately owned and therefore not a publicly owned company. Consequently, the Freedom of Information Acts do not apply to Magnox, except where stipulated in employee contracts with the NDA, and therefore neither does the IR35 reforms. This means there can be nothing but confusion and concern caused by the use of different definitions of the public sector in different legislation and the UK Government's proposals. This is a matter also of concern to the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority as well as the nuclear decommissioning workers. The reason it matters so much to nuclear decommissioning workers in Hunterston A and other sites across the United Kingdom is that adverse potential financial impact such definitions will have on the employees of Magnox. The goalposts cannot be changed. Definitions cannot be manipulated by the powers that be to the financial detriment of those who work on these sites day in, day out. I wrote to the Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy on this very issue, asking for this apparent confusion to be clarified. I sent that letter, Mr Chair, on the 7th of February, and to date have had no response. Presumably, the Secretary of State himself is trying to work out this apparent contradiction. And I hope he's able to do so soon, as the workers in Hunterston A and the rest of this industry are waiting on tenterhooks for him to dispense his wisdom on this bewildering state of affairs. And of course, all of this comes hard on the heels of the punitive exit cap payments, which have had a hugely detrimental impact on the pensions and redundancy payments of those over 55s made redundant after years of service. The fact is, as I've already pointed out, these workers have been caught up in this because they have been classified as public sector workers, even though they are employed in the private sector. The only fair, the only reasonable thing to do would be for the UK Government to announce that in the Enterprise Act of 2016, these workers are exempted from the exit cap payments. I will indeed.
I congratulate her for securing this debate. She's right to talk about the double whammy that nuclear workers face. Also, during the passage of the said Act, there was reference made that their pensions would not be touched. So not only has the government broke its word for time of privatisation, but they've broken their word that they gave last year as well. And I'm hopeful that the Minister will take note of this and respond to it, because it's unfair to the workers and their communities, and these are dedicated workers in dedicated communities.
Absolutely. And the only disagreement I would have with the honourable gentleman is if you take into account the reforms in the mid-2000s to these pensions and the new reforms that are proposed in the exit cap payments, it's actually a triple whammy. And yes, I'm very hopeful that the Minister today will have something to say to us about the exit cap payments. We know that the exit cap payments issue was pushed to a vote for the nuclear decommissioning workers when it was going through the Commons, but the government voted them down, and I'm hoping today, perhaps blindly optimistically, that the UK government is willing to reconsider on that. Whilst talks have led to a new nuclear decommissioning authority proposal, the trade union's consensus is that more must be done to put pension provisions on a par with the public sector, including improvements for those new starters in a defined contribution scheme, so that their pension is protected if it is outsourced. So clearly, despite significant pension guarantees in the 1980s, despite major pension reform in the mid-2000s, despite the exit payments cap, workers in the nuclear decommissioning industry are in the firing line. The fact is, as has already been mentioned in this debate, this is part of a broader narrative from the UK government that seeks to reduce pensions across the board. We see action taken against public sector pensions across the board. We've seen it with the way WASPy women have had the feet cut from under them as they approach what they thought was their retirement age. And now the catalogue of broken promises and betrayal of nuclear decommissioning workers, which every speaker today and everybody present today would acknowledge. It is clear that this government, despite protestations to the contrary, does not see benefits, so it does not see pensions as a contract. It sees pensions as a benefit. Pensions, to be clear, are a contract. They are not a benefit. They are paid into, and expectations, reasonable expectations, are at the end of working life that what can be expected should be clear and something upon which you can depend. Public sector workers, WASPy women, and now workers in the nuclear decommissioning industry have discovered to their cost that this is no longer the case. These contracts can be torn up at will, or so it would seem. Assurances apparently mean nothing. Years of service and paying in mean nothing. If this is the case, what does this say about the relationship between the governing and the governed? On what can one put faith in, if not in a contract with one's government? These moves have to be resisted. We know that an offer from the government is currently being considered by the workers in the nuclear decommissioning industry. I don't know the details of that offer, but sadly, I'm pretty sure it will mean an erosion, a further erosion in the pensions of these workers to some degree. That is simply not acceptable for all the reasons that you've heard about. And I say this to those workers not directly affected by this measure. Next, it may well be your pension. That is why this issue should matter to all of us. Who knows what group of workers will be next in the firing line? And I urge the Minister and this government to think again.
Thank you. The question is, this House has considered pensions in the nuclear decommissioning industry, and the debate can run until 4:30. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Hollowbone, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I will start by congratulating the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing this important debate today and for the passionate and informative speech that she has given. The Government does understand the concerns of the workforce across the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority estate, including very much those employees working at the Hunterston A power station within her constituency, about public sector pension reform. It is also good to see my honourable friend for Copeland in her place, representing the interests of her constituents who work in Sellafield. We recognise the vital work that the NDA and the wider workforce across the estate delivers on decommissioning, while maintaining the priority of safe and secure operations in a very difficult environment. And we remain firmly committed to support for the nuclear decommissioning programme. The NDA has been allocated £11 billion of taxpayer funding over the 2015 spending review period. However, in line with the challenges the UK faces to balance the deficit, the NDA has been set a proportionate programme of efficiencies and savings for the period of around about £1 billion. And it was agreed in the spending review that some of these savings would come from the reform of the two final salary defined benefit pension schemes within the NDA estate. Approximately 10,800 employees are members of the now closed final salary pension schemes. As the Honourable Lady mentioned, they closed in the 2000s. The aim of the NDA consultation is to reform these schemes to career average revalued earnings, or CARE for short, schemes, in the spirit of the recommendations made by Lord Hutton in his 2011 review of pensions. Since 2006, new starters have been offered membership to this high-quality defined contribution pension scheme, which is out of scope for reform. With regard to statutory pension protections, the Government acknowledges that care reform would require amendments to statutory pension protections put in place at the time of privatisation of the electricity sector in the 1980s and the Energy Act 2004, when the NDA was first established. These protections sought to provide pension benefits for existing scheme members that were at least as good as those they were receiving prior to those reforms. And this is why the Government has worked with the NDA in considering how best to implement pension reform. As a first step, the NDA held discussions with the trade unions on the potential for non-legislative options as an alternative to care to realise the required savings. As a result of those discussions, the NDA launched a consultation document on the 9th of February setting out details on two options: the care option and a pensionable pay cap, a non-legislative option. And the consultation was due to end on the 10th of March. During those discussions, a number of concerns were raised, which the Government and NDA have actively listened to and sought to address. And following a meeting in February between my honourable friend, the Minister for Energy, the NDA and National Trade Union representatives, the NDA and trade unions reached agreement to table a third option, a revised care pension reform proposal for consultation with the workforce, which better reflected the particular circumstances faced by the NDA workforce. This option was announced by the NDA and trade unions in a joint statement on the 2nd of March. The consultation period with the NDA workforce has therefore been extended until the 21st of April to allow the workforce to consider this new option. The trade unions have committed to hold consultative ballots on the proposal, described as the best achievable through negotiation, and support implementation if the proposal is accepted by the members. Consultative ballots are due to take place in April and conclude by early May. Yes, I will give way.
Thank her for giving way, because she's making a very important point. I too welcome the progress that's been made in this pension thing, but can she deal with the exit payment? Because no discussions were done then, and exemptions have been given to Royal Bank of Scotland, for one example. She's a reasonable person. I think the nuclear workers have been caught up in this. Will she agree today to look into this serious issue and to come up with a reasonable response?
I thank the honourable gentleman for the point he raised, which has actually been raised as well by the proposer of the debate and also the honourable member for Dwight and Merry on it. So it is a very important point that he raises. And my department and the NDA have met and continue to meet with trade union representatives regarding the cap on exit payments. And my honourable friend, the Minister for Energy, is listening to the important concerns that workers have in the NDA estate over this cap, and is in discussion, if I could just progress, is in discussion with the Treasury. I will give way to the Honourable Lady.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank the Minister for giving way. I wonder if, perhaps if I'm hurrying the Minister along, if I raise a question about the apparent confusion in different pieces of legislation about whether these workers are public sector workers or private sector workers, and why the goalposts change when it is apparently convenient that they should, but not to the workers' advantage.
Minister.
I understand the point that the Honourable Lady makes, which she did make in her speech as well, and I did take note of it. And I gather she has written to the Secretary of State early in February on the very point and is still awaiting a reply. And a reply will be forthcoming I'm very sorry I'm not able to be definitive today, but I can assure her that ministers in my department take the point she makes and the point the honourable gentleman makes very seriously indeed. We're listening to the concerns of the workforce that she represents. And as I said, my honourable friend, the Minister for Energy, is in discussion with the Treasury to try to clarify the point so that the workforce know where they stand. I absolutely sympathise with a workforce that doesn't know where it stands. It's an unsatisfactory situation, but I can assure her that it is one that is approaching a remedy. And so that we recognise that nuclear decommissioning is a closure industry, and many workers have devoted careers to the industry, knowing that their sites may close before they retire. We are actively exploring the potential impact of the cap on workforces at sites being actively decommissioned and which are on the path to closure, such as Hunterston A in her constituency. And I will pass back the comments of all members in this debate to my honourable friend, the Energy Minister. Once the consultation period on the pension issue has finished, the NDA will take account of the consultation responses and make proposals for ministers to consider after this. Government will not take a final decision before the consultation has concluded. However, we believe that the revised care proposal does offer a fair and sustainable solution. As the debate draws to a close, and the Honourable Lady will have a further say, I want to reiterate that the Government recognises the concerns of the workforce.
I'm afraid the Honourable Lady doesn't have a further say in this half-hour debate, but the Minister has 10 minutes left. So there's plenty of opportunity for members to intervene if they wish to do so, but we must finish no later than 4:30. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I thought that the proposer of the motion had 2 minutes at the end, but she can take she can take advantage of your offer of further interventions, and I would be delighted to give way. But while I'm on my feet, I will continue. And I want to reiterate that the Government recognises the concerns that she and other honourable members have raised about the workforce across the NDA estate about pension reform. I want to emphasise that the aim of pension reform is to balance the legitimate concerns of taxpayers about the present and future costs of pension commitments with the workforce's concern to maintain decent levels of retirement income to which they have contributed and which they have earned. It is right that we debate this important issue, and I'd like to thank all members for their views today on... Yes, I will give way.
I heard what she said, and I appreciate that she is going to take this back to the appropriate minister. Would she agree, either through herself or the minister, to meet with a delegation of representatives from cross-party from the nuclear workers' areas, so that she will know about early day in motion 915, which are 120 plus signatories. This is an issue across the country. Would she agree to meet with us so we can have further discussions? This debate is very helpful, but I think we need further discussions on this issue.
Well, I will certainly pass the honourable gentleman's kind invitation to meet to my honourable friend, the Minister for Energy. I think he is gainfully employed at the moment meeting the Treasury with the interests of the NDA workforce very much to heart. But I'm sure that he will consider the invitation proffered by the honourable gentleman. My officials will reflect... Yes, I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. We've also had debates regarding the Hewlett-Packard workforce that was again taken over from digital, and at that time the Minister responding said that really nothing could be done because it was purely a private company. But in this instance, part of this is, as my honourable friend has said, this moving of the goalposts in definition between public and private and back again, and therefore the government really can do something for these workers.
Well, the Honourable Lady does make a good point about the difference in the nature of the public-private definition. This industry has had £15 billion worth of government taxpayer support, so it does sit where it sits. And my officials will reflect on the views that all members have taken today as we consider further the options for NDA pension reform, and the Government will set out the next steps following the NDA consultation on pension reform.
Question is that this House has considered pensions in the nuclear decommissioning industry. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.